The name of the story, A Love Too Brief. Chapter 1, Before the Fall. London. Late October. King's Cross Station. The rain outside was a steady whisper, painting the city in a soft, silvery haze. It was the kind of rain that didn't just fall, but seemed to soak into the very soul of the place, blurring the edges of the towering buildings and the hurried footsteps beneath their shadows. Inside King's Cross Station, the atmosphere was a chaotic symphony of sounds. Distant train whistles, the murmur of thousands of conversations, the echoing clatter of rolling suitcases over polished floors. But on one faded wooden bench in the waiting hall, time seemed to slow. Elena sat there, a worn book open on her lap, but her eyes wandered aimlessly, tracing invisible patterns on the floor. The dull brown suitcase at her feet had traveled hundreds of miles with her, but the weight in her heart was far heavier. She was a photographer by passion and habit, but now she felt like a stranger in the city she once called home. Across from her, a man settled quietly onto the opposite bench. He was tall, with dark hair curling slightly at the nape of his neck and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of countless untold stories. He wore a long, worn coat, and in his hands a steaming cup of tea, the only warmth he carried with him. His name was James. For a while, they shared the silence, two strangers caught in the same restless moment. Then Elena broke the quiet. "You're not waiting for a train?" she asked softly, the words barely above the hum of the station. James looked up, his gaze meeting hers with an unspoken understanding. "No," he replied, "just watching the world leave without me." A fragile smile flickered on Elena's lips as she closed her book, intrigued despite herself. "Then maybe we're meant to talk," she said. The station's cacophony continued around them. Hurried footsteps, distant announcements, laughter and goodbyes. But between Elena and James, a quiet bubble formed, a small refuge carved out of the chaos. James took a slow sip of his tea, the warmth seeming to ground him just a little. Elena watched him with curious eyes. There was something both weary and hopeful in his gaze, a contradiction she found herself drawn to. "Where are you headed?" she asked, her voice gentle. James hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "Nowhere in particular. Just waiting." Elena smiled knowingly. "Sometimes waiting is the hardest journey." He nodded, and for the first time, allowed himself to truly look at her. She was a patchwork of contradictions, too, vibrant yet quiet, carrying the weight of stories he wanted to hear but feared to ask. The train announcements rang out again, and Elena glanced at the board. Her train was delayed, again. A small sigh escaped her lips. James smiled faintly. "Maybe the universe is giving us a chance." She laughed softly, the sound like a fragile melody in the bustling station. They began to talk, first about small things, the unpredictable London weather, favorite books, the smell of old libraries. Then, slowly, their stories unfolded. Elena spoke of her travels, the coastal villages where the sea stretched endless and the sunsets painted the sky in impossible colors. James listened, captivated, sharing little but the quiet strength of his presence. The minutes stretched into an hour, but neither noticed. Elena found herself lowering the walls she'd carefully built around her heart. She spoke of moments she'd captured on film, a child's laughter frozen in a sunbeam, the quiet dignity of an old man sitting alone on a park bench, the way light danced on rain-soaked cobblestones. Each story was a thread weaving them closer. James, meanwhile, remained mostly silent, but his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. Occasionally, a shadow would cross his face, a flicker of pain or a memory he fought to suppress. Yet, when he spoke, his words were deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had loved deeply and lost. "I don't talk much about myself," he admitted finally, "but I guess that's because some stories are too heavy to share." Elena nodded, understanding more than he realized. Sometimes silence says more than words. They both smiled. A fragile connection formed in the shared understanding of unspoken grief. As the station grew colder with the creeping dusk, James glanced at the clock, then back at Elena. "If your train's delayed again tomorrow, Maybe we could meet. For real this time. Elena's heart skipped, the hope in his voice a balm she didn't expect to find. I'd like that. That night, Elena lay awake, replaying every word, every glance. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of something bright. A fragile hope, trembling but alive. And James, in the quiet darkness of his small apartment, reached for a photo of a distant coastline. A place he'd never been but longed to see. He whispered to the night, maybe tomorrow. The next day, the sky hung heavy with low clouds, threatening rain but never quite spilling. Elena arrived at King's Cross a little early, heart fluttering with anticipation she hadn't felt in a long time. James was already there, perched on the same weathered bench, a steaming cup of tea in hand. His coat was buttoned high against the chill, and a faint smile greeted her like a secret shared. Late again, he teased gently. Only by a few minutes, she replied, pulling her scarf tighter. But on time for tea. They sat side by side, the silence between them comfortable now, like a soft blanket wrapped around two tired souls. As the weeks passed, their meetings became rituals, small islands of calm in the relentless rush of the city. They explored quiet corners of London, the winding alleys of Covent Garden, where street musicians played melodies that seemed to echo their own unspoken stories. The shaded benches of Hyde Park where the scent of damp earth mingled with the distant laughter of children. Cozy cafes tucked away from the noise, where time slowed to the pace of whispered confessions. One afternoon, James led Elena to a tiny bookshop squeezed between two tall buildings. The shelves groaned with dusty volumes, and the air smelled of old paper and secrets. He handed her a leather-bound journal, worn and soft. "Write your stories here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Elena traced the cover with her fingers, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't know if I have any left," she murmured. "You do," James replied. "You just need someone to help you find them." Their conversations deepened. They shared childhood memories, dreams long buried, the fears they hid even from themselves. Elena learned that James was once a musician, a composer whose melodies had filled small concert halls until illness stole his strength. He spoke rarely of those days, but when he did, his eyes shone with both pride and sorrow. One chilly evening, wrapped in scarves in the glow of street lamps, they found themselves on the banks of the Thames. The water was a dark ribbon, reflecting the city lights like scattered stars. James took Elena's hand, their fingers intertwining with tentative hope. "Sometimes," he said, voice low and raw, "I think about the music I'll never write, the songs I'll never share." Elena squeezed his hand. "Maybe you've already written your most important song, the one you're living now." He smiled, a fragile, fleeting thing. Nights grew colder, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Elena often stayed late at his flat, wrapped in his sweaters, listening to jazz records spinning softly on an old turntable. They didn't need many words. The silence between them was filled with understanding, with the gentle acceptance of broken things trying to heal. But beneath the surface, shadows lengthened. James' coughs came more often, his steps slower. Yet he masked it with quiet smiles, refusing to let Elena see the storm within. And Elena, afraid to lose this fragile happiness, chose silence too. Days slipped into weeks. London's gray skies gave way to early hints of winter, the sharp chill in the air pressing against their skin whenever they ventured outside. Yet inside James's flat, the old radiator hummed a comforting tune, and the soft crackle of vinyl filled the small space. Elena found herself more and more at home there. The way the light caught the dust motes dancing above the worn wooden floor, the way James's fingers moved gently over the keys of an old piano in the corner. One evening, as rain tapped rhythmically against the window panes, she watched him from across the room. His face was pale, shadows deepening beneath his eyes, but his smile was steady as he played a slow, haunting melody. "You should rest," she whispered, moving closer. James stopped, sighing softly. "I don't want to waste these moments." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You're not wasting anything. You're giving me everything." For a moment, their eyes met, a silent promise, fragile as frost on a window. But nights were becoming harder for James. The coughing fits came without warning, leaving him breathless and exhausted. He hid the medicine bottles in the back of the cupboard, his hands trembling as he took the pills. Elena noticed the changes, the way he winced sometimes when he stood up too quickly, the quiet moments when he stared out the window, lost in thought. Yet whenever she asked, he smiled and said he was fine. She wanted to believe him. One late November afternoon, wrapped in thick coats and scarves, they took a slow walk through Hyde Park. The trees were bare, their skeletal branches reaching skyward like fingers searching for light. Elena snapped photos, a habit she couldn't shake, capturing the stark beauty of the season. James watched her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked softly. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, but mostly I live in the moments we have." She nodded, squeezing his hand. "Then let's make every moment count." That night, after she left, James sat alone in the dark, the weight of his secret pressing heavily on his chest. He opened a small notebook, filled with sketches of notes and melodies. His fingers traced a new composition, a song not yet born, but filled with all the hope and sorrow of a life fading too soon. He whispered into the silence, "For you." Chapter 2. All the words we didn't say. Winter crept quietly over the city, dusting the streets with frost and stealing the last warmth from the fading days. The light in James's flat felt dimmer, shadows longer, as if the walls themselves mourned what was coming. Elena arrived one evening to find James sitting by the window, a worn scarf around his neck, his breath visible in the cold air. "Are you feeling better?" she asked, concern threading her voice. He gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Better enough. Days passed, but the cough worsened, stealing his strength. Yet, whenever Elena tried to speak about it, he shut her out with gentle deflections. "I don't want your pity," he said one night, voice rough. She stayed silent, heart aching. One afternoon, Elena met a new client, Alec. Tall, easygoing, with a kind smile that reached his eyes. He was everything James was not, vibrant, confident, full of life. At first, James barely noticed, but Elena found herself drawn to Alec's energy, the way he laughed without reservation, the way he seemed to believe in second chances. Tensions grew without words. James's silences became walls. Elena's fears became storms. One rainy evening, they sat across from each other at a small cafe, the air thick with unsaid things. "I don't know how to be with you anymore," Elena whispered. James looked away, pain flickering in his gaze. "Maybe we're already lost." Tears slipped down her cheeks. They reached for each other, but the distance had already grown too wide. Days turned colder, and the city seemed to close in around Elena like a cage made of fog and silence. She found herself spending more time with Alec, whose laughter was a balm to her weary soul. He listened without judgment, held her hand when the weight of her world became too much, and saw her in ways James no longer could. One evening, after a gallery opening, Alec walked Elena home through the rain-soaked streets. Under the flickering street lamp, his hand brushed hers. She didn't pull away. Meanwhile, James's health declined quietly. He grew thinner, paler. The music that once filled his soul grew quieter, notes slipping away like lost memories. Elena wrestled with guilt. She loved James, deeply, truly, but the loneliness in their shared silence was unbearable. She tried to tell him, to reach him, but the walls he built were too high. One cold morning, Elena's phone lit up with a message from Alec. "Can we talk? I'm worried about you." She typed back, "Me too." That night, Elena stood at the window of her flat, looking out at the city lights. Her heart was torn between two worlds, the past with James and a future with Alec that felt both frightening and necessary. Elena's perspective. The nights grew longer and colder, and Elena felt herself slipping into a fog she couldn't escape. She tried to hold on to James, to the fragile threads of their love, but every attempt was met with silence or gentle deflections. She remembered the warmth in his eyes when they first met, that rare light that made the world seem possible again. Now that light flickered fragile and dim. She found comfort in Alec's presence, his laughter like a balm to her loneliness. But guilt gnawed at her relentlessly. Loving James and wanting someone else felt like a betrayal. "Am I a coward?" she whispered to the dark, tears blurring the city lights. James's perspective. James sat alone in the dim light of his flat, the music box silent on the table. His body betrayed him, his breath shallow and uneven. He knew the end was near, but he refused to let it define his final days. He thought of Elena often, her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of sunsets and dreams. He wanted to tell her everything, but the words stuck like stones in his throat. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to the empty room. Loneliness wrapped around him like a second skin, and he wondered if she could hear the silent pleas behind his silence. The fragile balance shattered one cold, gray afternoon. Elena arrived at James's flat to find the door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was heavy with silence. She found him slumped in the worn armchair, eyes closed, face pale and drawn. "James!" Her voice trembled. He opened his eyes slowly, managing a faint smile. "I'm okay." But the truth was clear, he was not. Days later, Elena met Alec for coffee, her hands wrapped tightly around the warm mug. "I can't do this anymore," she confessed, voice breaking. Alec reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "It's okay to want more." Tears spilled freely as she nodded, the weight of years crushing her chest. Back in his flat, James felt the walls closing in. He knew she was slipping away, but he couldn't find the strength to hold on. One evening, he left a letter on the kitchen table, words he couldn't say aloud. "I never wanted to lose you," it read, "but I don't want you to stay out of guilt." Elena found the letter after she had already packed her bags. She read it over and over, each word a knife twisting deeper. She wanted to turn back time, to rewrite the story, but some things can never be undone. Chapter 3. When it was almost forever. The city was a muted blur through the rain-streaked windows of the small cafe where Elena waited. Her hands trembled as she folded and unfolded the letter James had given her, the one she hadn't dared to open until now. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see him step inside. He looked thinner, more fragile than she remembered, but his eyes held the same gentle kindness. They sat together in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. James finally broke the quiet. "I wanted more time," he whispered. "More moments with you." Elena reached out, taking his hand. "Me too." Tears filled their eyes as they spoke the words that had been trapped inside for so long. That night, they walked along the riverbank under the soft glow of streetlights. James stopped and looked at her. "I'm tired," he said softly, "but being here with you, it's enough." Elena nodded, fighting the sobs, threatening to break free. "I love you," she said. He smiled faintly. "I love you too. Always." Days later, James was gone. Elena stood where they had first met, the station now silent without him. Her heart ached with the loss of a love that was never meant to last forever. End of story. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.